Okay, ladies and gentlemen.
Help, the record button's gone. We can't find it. If you've seen a record button, please report it to History According to Hollywood.
Searchers was last week. We're not looking for anything this week, okay?
That's right. We're wishing good morning to our friends and loved ones in Southeast Asia.
Good morning, Southwest Missouri, Northwest Arkansas. We are now only 95%. Did I already say this? 95% United States. We have 5% abroad.
Yeah, we went over that last episode, I think.
Whatever. I'm still excited about it. I'll say it again. All right. Well, guys, we're coming back with another episode. It's another Tuesday.
Yeah, it is.
It's really Monday night for us, but it's Tuesday when this drops. It's whatever day, whenever you're listening to it, and we're glad you're here.
We just wish there were more of you.
Well, yeah, but we appreciate the ones that are here. Optimistic, true. Kyle. Optimistic.
Sure, buddy. Optimistic as I sit in my 83-degree house that has no AC. Yeah. Optimism. Well, it's really getting me through the dark times.
Look on the bright side. At least it's not really cold.
I'd rather it be really cold.
Oh, no, you're one of those people.
Yeah, you can always put more clothing and blankets on.
Don't even start. I'd rather walk around naked and still be sweating than
good for you
to be covered up and still cold.
Here's the thing: is it broke last week and it's not getting fixed until next week. That's the rub, because it's a whole HVAC system, baby.
I'd be finding a hotel, hotel.
Well, if I didn't have to work and it didn't have a giant 100-pound German Shepherd, I'd be finding a whole hotel.
That's fine. Yep, that's
as
fair.
it is. We spent the last 4 days couch surfing places, but finally it's going to get back below 75 at night for a couple nights, so we should be able to survive.
You can do this. I have faith in you.
Please, God.
All right, Kyle. I'm probably going to have to cut all of that, but anyways.
Nah, man, it's a good segue. Come on. Vietnam's hot. My house is hot. There you go.
Yep. All right, Kyle, what are we talking about this week?
We're talking about Robin Williams', maybe one of his most understated movies, Good Morning Vietnam.
You said understated last week, too. You really like that understated word.
I love that word.
Now.
Understated.
It's a great word.
It's my word of the month calendar.
I don't know what it means. All right. From
next month will be supercalifragilisticexpialidocious.
Next month it'll be AC.
Yes. Please, God.
The miracle known as air conditioning.
Amen. I don't know how people survived beforehand.
Well, speaking of surviving without AC.
Yeah, no joke.
1987, Good Morning Vietnam, shot in Thailand. Fun fact. Anyways, this is sitting at a 7.3 on IMDb. 90% from critics. 82% from audience. Those are high numbers, man.
It's repping. It is repping.
Directed by Barry Levinson, who followed this up with a little film, you may have heard of it, Rain Man.
Oh,
which won him Best Director in 1989.
Hot Water Burn Baby, man.
The screenplay was written by Mitch Markowitz, who almost exclusively wrote one-off TV episodes, including MASH, which was why he was brought on to write this. He also wrote a single episode of Monk. I've never watched Monk.
Me neither.
I've heard a lot of people like it, though. All right, you want to know who wrote the story of this?
Who wrote the story of this?
You want to guess his name? You know his name.
Oh, do I know his name?
You know his name.
I don't know.
Adrian Cronauer.
Oh, I see.
What did he do in real life? He was a radio disc jockey who volunteered to go to Vietnam in the early 60s. He was stationed in Greece before requesting a transfer to Nam. Why? Because he, quote unquote, wanted to travel. So he goes to Vietnam in the early to mid 60s. Okay? Shortly after arriving, he took over the 6 a.m. morning show on the radio and did, in fact, begin his broadcast with the now famous words, Good Morning Vietnam. He also did teach English in his off-duty time, and in 1979, he tried to sell the treatment for what would become this movie, but he tried to do it as a TV show, and it didn't take. It was based off his real life. He rewrote it as a made-for-TV movie, And a few years later, he pitched it to a studio executive who got it in the hands of Robin Williams, and the rest is history.
Nice. I didn't know he was a real person, so look at me schlumping on the history.
Well, I didn't know that either until I looked it up, and I was because it said like written by on the IMDb quote or the IMDb credits, and it was like Adrian Cronauer, and I was like, I know that name.
I know that name. Hold up, wait a second.
So for those of you who, or if you haven't watched this recently, or if you just don't remember, Adrian Cronauer is Robin Williams' character in this movie, so that's why it's important that it's based on a real person. Now, he says it's about 40% real. He says it's 60% is all fictionalized. Robin Williams at the time had starred as Popeye, Mort from Mort and Mindy, probably his most well-known thing at this time, and Life According to Garp. This role would get him an Oscar nomination for Best Actor.
As it should have, honestly.
Pretty cool. So we're going to be in Saigon, 1965. We're going to start our movie. Also, I feel like we don't point this out enough. We talked about basically the entire plot of the movie. So if you haven't seen this and you're like, this will be great, I'll listen to the podcast and then I'll watch the movie. Flip those.
Yeah, don't do that.
Unless you don't plan on watching the movie.
Especially not with a comedy. You know, I think some of the more dramatic entries we do, it's worth a watch just to see it.
Mm-hmm.
But with the comedies, please go watch the movie. Yeah. Please do that. Do yourself a favor.
I don't know. I would almost argue the opposite. I would argue that with a comedy, it would be less detrimental to know the spoilers. But a drama, you need to know what happens. I don't know. I guess it's to each their own. All right. So, standing out like a pink striped shirt wearing sore thumb, Robin Williams' character, Adrian Cronauer, arrives. He's picked up by Edward. He's picked up by Edward Garlick, played by Forrest Whitaker.
Forrest Whitaker, baby.
Who had also played in Platoon not too long before this. So he had already been in a movie about Vietnam. He had already starred in a movie about Vietnam. Long story short, the morale amongst American soldiers in Vietnam is low. Shocker, I know. And Adrian has been brought in as a DJ after being discovered at a stand-up comedy show. Sergeant Major Dickerson, Major Dickerson,
Major Dick,
is introduced, and then Lieutenant Stephen Hawke is also introduced. And if you close your eyes, man, he sounds just like Joe Pesci.
Yes, he does.
He does. I was like, I know that guy, and then I listened up and I was like, I don't know who the heck he is. I was like, oh, it's because he sounds like Joe Pesci. Okay.
Yeah.
Robert Wool, I don't know how to say that. Robert Wool, who plays Marty Lee Darowitz. Man, I'm just nailing these names.
Oh, you're killing it. You're killing it. Okay. Keep going. I want to hear what's next.
All right. So he played Alexander Knotts in Batman '89. Probably
Lord.
his biggest role. Well, he wasn't even a huge role in the movie, but damn, that was a big movie. Edward pulls Adrian out of bed at 5:30 for his first shift on the air, and then we cut to like a typewriter, and there's like paper going through it, and I was like, who is typing this fast? This is insane. And then it zooms out, and you see that it's a machine.
It's electric.
I was like, oh, okay,
yeah,
that makes
more sense. It's a fax machine. Yeah.
Yeah, what type of machine is this? Is this just like how they?
Yeah, it's an analog fax machine. Is basically what it is. It sends it. Usually, depending on how it's set up in the early '60s, sometimes still through Morse code, but it's literally just a fax machine. And technically, fax has been around since the 1800s. It just used to be you would send dotted and dashed Morse code messages, and they'd be brought out dotted and dashed in the same way, and then it just evolved as technology evolved.
Very cool. The twins from T2 are here, which is awesome. So while the new guy rants his ear off, Adrian sets up and proceeds to provide several minutes of the most fast-paced skit comedy filled with one-liners, full of energy. This is Robin Williams. This is his stand-up being brought into cinema, and this is why he took the role, is because he felt that this was perfect for him, and he's proving that it is. Any imitation would be an insult and disservice. It's an instant hit. There's nothing else to say.
It's awesome. Go watch the scene. I think you can find that specific scene on YouTube. If nothing else, go watch that scene.
Yeah, and it's crazy that apparently he ad-libbed every single one of those broadcasts.
Holy cow.
Or at least it was not scripted. So, ad-libbed, maybe not 100%, but like it's like sketches that he just kind of threw together. So after an instant classic performance with his first time on the mic, he's branded by Stephen Hawke, who's quickly going to become like one of our main antagonists here. Also, we find out former VP Mr. Richard Nixon will be arriving to their base soon. He hadn't been president in 65?
No. So he is, he's actually Eisenhower's vice president. And he runs against JFK for the presidential election and gets pretty stomped, honestly. Yeah. And then you have JFK gets shot halfway through his term. So then Lyndon B. Johnson takes over. So by 65, Lyndon B. Johnson has won the 1964 election by a landslide.
Okay.
So Richard Nixon's kind of this, disgraced isn't the right word, but this kind of fringe politician who's the face of Johnson's opposition. But in 1965, it's not very strong yet because Johnson is still a super popular president.
Oh, don't worry. That'll change.
Yes, it will.
Was it 68? Is that when Richard Nixon?
Yeah, he wins the 68 election because through just the awful coincidence that is war, the Tet Offensive happens in 1968. And it's so from 1964 to 1968, Johnson tells the American public that we are definitively winning in Vietnam. We have almost completely destroyed North Vietnam and the Viet Cong's ability to make war, and we will be done soon. And in the Tet Offensive, hundreds of thousands of well-armed and well-trained North Vietnamese and Viet Cong soldiers attack literally every major military base in southern Vietnam, capture some of them, besiege others for weeks, and though they lose the battle, it's the battle that wins the war for for North Vietnam, because the American people are like, well, obviously they're fine. Like, obviously they can still fight. So what else have you been lying to us about?
Okay.
So
is LBJ the one who said, I'm not running for re-election?
Yeah. Okay. He's the one who, after Tet, he's like, that's ridiculous. I'm done.
Like, all right. I'm taking the
He
L.
smells the coffee. He's tired of dealing with Vietnam, because Vietnam, granted, is partly a beast of his own making, but it was going on before he ever sat in the Oval Office, and it goes on long after he's gone. So,
speaking of which, there is a line here where it says, "What if it escalated? What if the Vietnam conflict escalated? What does this mean?"
So at this point, you're really, really afraid of the Korean War Round 2 in Vietnam, because North Vietnam borders China, much like North Korea did. What happens in the Korean War is it goes from almost complete North Korean victory to almost complete United Nations victory to a stalemate, because they poke the bear too far and they get China involved, and China sends 3 million soldiers crashing across the North Korean border to backhand the American and Allied forces. In Vietnam, they're trying to be more careful because they don't want to provoke China again. And the biggest difference between this time and last time is that China's gone nuclear. China has nukes. The Soviet Union has nukes. The U.S. has nukes. They're trying to keep this contained to a Vietnamese affair. And in their minds, the best way to do that is we do not attack North Vietnam with ground troops. We might bomb the hell out of it. We stay in South Vietnam and we defend the South, which is why they can never win, because the North Vietnamese are just not ever going to give up.
Gotcha. Okay.
So if it escalates, if we invade North Vietnam or China sends 2 million soldiers to North Vietnam, it's bad. It's bad. It's maybe World War III.
Okay.
And that, in reality, that's not as close to happening as they thought it was. China and the USSR really, really like North Vietnam as something to kill American soldiers with. Aren't really super invested in protecting it, especially the later they get in the war. But from the American perspective, it's an understandable fear to have, is that, don't poke the little communist country too hard, otherwise the big ones are going to come after you.
Okay, I got one more question for you before we move on. Adrian has a line, real homey in an opium kind of way. Where does this presence of opium in Vietnam come from?
It comes from everywhere, but mostly people in Vietnam found out really quickly that you can make a lot of money selling drugs to American GIs, because they're super depressed. All of them have PTSD. because of the nature of the Vietnam War, and they don't want to be there. And you have marijuana and opiates and all sorts of fun stuff, to the extent that today there's even a drug lord safe haven called the Golden Triangle that kind of goes between Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam, just in the middle of nowhere land in those 3 or 4 countries.
Yeah.
That is directly caused by the amount of drugs they sold to American GIs in the Vietnam War.
Wow.
It's crazy. Yeah, it's a lot.
All right. Adrian lets it all go for the third Vietnamese woman that he sees dressed in a long white gown with a sun hat. That's not the same lady each time. No. Okay, he plays it off like it is, because he's like, oh, if she walked by me a third time, imagine how badly she wants me. Like, but I was like, that's not the same woman. Anyways, this time chasing
you and
her
Garlic
down.
both.
Yeah, no kidding.
You and Private Garlic both.
Poor Forrest Whitaker, the only sensible person in this whole cast.
I always forget how big of a human that man is until I see him in movies next to normal sized people, and I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
A great line. Garlic, have you gained weight? No, sir, I don't believe so. Damn, son, the shadow of your ass would weigh 20 pounds.
Yeah. Oh man, that's good. Kind of mean, but that's good.
Yeah, it's mean, but it's funny.
So he's gonna chase her down on a bike that has no rubber on the tires. He learns that she's in an English class. Edward, meanwhile, is describing how boring his life is when it flashed before his eyes, because he almost gets run over by a truck.
Relatable.
It turns out the brother of Adrian's prospect is in the class, and he's not too happy about him trying to pursue his sister. This is Ton.
Yeah, I think.
Is that how you say it?
I think so.
T-A-U-N.
Ton. Yeah.
So he takes him back to a bar where they instantly forget about this for other women. I'm starting to see a pattern. I feel Adrian just wants a woman.
I mean, let me put this in perspective for you. You're an army radio man, and you've been in Crete, on a Crete military base.
Yeah.
For forever, surrounded by soldiers, and now you're going to Vietnam to be on military base surrounded by soldiers.
Yeah. Okay, that's fair.
Yeah.
I can see him foaming at the mouth a little bit.
Might be a little hot under the collar.
After a fight breaks out in the bar, Adrian is in trouble with Major Dickerson. And immediately after this ass chewing, he gets another one from Lieutenant Hawk. And then Adrian is dancing around to James Brown while phones ring off the hook with complaints and praises for his show. He is a sensation in Vietnam.
Oh, yeah. He has like one complaint and like 15,000 support letters or something.
Right.
Yeah.
And Hawk wants to point out the one complaint.
Yeah.
So he's going to continue to play the role of English teacher, teaching a room full of Vietnamese people curse words and slur expressions in English. Ironically, the only American song that Tren, the woman that he's pursuing, knows is "Puff the Magic Dragon" by the Beatles. And then I saw a fun fact about this, that there are no Beatles tracks in the soundtrack for this, because at the point of time they had not released the rights to it. So there's no Beatles songs in movies, period, up until, I wonder whenever that ended, but I'm not sure exactly when it ended, but apparently it was after this was released. We're going to go back to the visit of Nixon to Vietnam. Did he actually visit Vietnam and give a speech?
I believe he did, yes.
And
I will double check it, but yes, I believe he did.
And were there rumors that he actually smote the devil's lettuce? Was he a deviant?
No, so they're not rumors. It's actually making fun of how like fanatically anti-marijuana Nixon is.
Oh, okay.
He is insanely anti-weed.
Right.
To the extent that there are recorded memoirs of him saying that he needs to make a statement, a strong statement, a GD strong statement against these marijuana lovers. And fun fact, have you ever thought about the fact that all of these people pushing marijuana also happen to be Jews? Like that level of opposed to marijuana.
Yikes.
And racist. And yeah. Nixon's not a good human, man. He's just not.
Wait, so that was his, wait, hold on. We're like 20 years removed from World War II. Mm-hmm. And he thought that was working? That was going to be beneficial for him?
Yeah, I mean, apparently he did. Apparently that's what he thought.
To be like, I'm not only my anti-drug, I'm also an anti-Semite at the same time.
Yeah.
What was the train of thought there? How does that make any sense?
You know, the thing you got to understand about Richard Nixon is really
that you can't understand it.
Well, that yes. He's also at the point where anything Lyndon Johnson supports, or anything anybody who supports Lyndon Johnson supports or doesn't hate, I'm a hate.
Okay,
Because that's my political standing.
Gosh, there's a reason he's a freaking meme.
Yeah, man, he's he's rough. He's also he's not publicly racist, but he's openly racist in his cabinet talks.
Well, at least he's not publicly racist.
Yeah, at least he can keep it on recorded film, I suppose.
Oof.
Yeah, it's yeah. Yeah.
So
there's a reason that the nation rebounded after he resigns and Gerald Ford takes over, and they elect Jimmy Carter, who in many ways is maybe the most liberal president ever elected, because, you know, extreme breeds extreme.
Right.
So
Carter's still alive, isn't he?
Jimmy Carter is still alive. He's 99 years old.
Go Jimmy.
He'll turn 100 on October 1st.
Come on, Jimmy.
Keep on cranking, Jimmy. You can get a letter from the president. How ironic would that be?
I'm your younger cousin.
Yeah, I couldn't with a quick search. I couldn't find if Nixon ever did travel to Vietnam and give a speech.
Okay.
Wouldn't surprise me if he did. Wouldn't surprise me if he didn't. It's weird that he would during Johnson's presidency, though. That I will tell you.
Okay.
Most of the speeches I can find that he made about Vietnam are while he's in office, which again would make sense, seeing as how he was the president. So jury's out.
Somehow.
It's not impossible. It feels like that was just something that the movie put in there
That's fair.
you know, put it in there.
Side note, wasn't when Nixon became president, that was when Robert F. Kennedy was assassinated, right?
Yeah, so
was that the same one? That was
it's the same election. Yeah,
okay.
Robert F. Kennedy is assassinated during the primaries because he's running against Herbert Humphrey, I think, is the Democratic candidate, and Kennedy's a dark horse, but he wins the California primary, which is huge. That's a massive number of delegates. And it looks like he's going to run the race down to the wire, and then right after the California primary results come in, Sirhan shoots him in the head and the chest in the middle of his speech.
Did he ever give a reason why?
Death to the enemies of Palestine. That's...
Really?
Yeah, so basically, even back then, Israel-Palestine's a big deal. Yeah.
Dang. I didn't know that.
That's what he screamed when he killed him, and that was all you really got out of him.
Yeah, you didn't think you'd learn that today, did you?
Nope.
Bonus facts. See, we're keeping it interesting over here in History According to Hollywood.
Oh, yeah.
Talking about all kinds of things, all kinds. All right, and the holy crap, that came out of nowhere award goes to Jimmy Wah's restaurant blowing the heck up.
Oh, yeah.
After Adrian leaves. There's a surreal moment that reminds the audience that we are indeed in the middle of a war. Now, our tone of movie is going to shift quickly because we have been 90% comedy, about 10% romance. It's Robin Williams being a lovable guy around a bunch of people who just seem to be of a different race and a different nationality. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, there's a freaking war going on.
Oh yeah, there's a reason he's here, and it's not only to say funny things on the radio.
Right. Military police arrive, and now military police, are these American or are these from the UN?
So basically, if there is a soldier who's not Vietnamese in South Vietnam, they're American. The Australians sent a couple, but it's not like Korea. It's not a big coalition, mostly because the rest of the world thinks it's silly. Well, they're like, you're never going to win that. It's been going on for 15 years by the time you even got there. Mm-hmm. Let it die, you know? So they're Americans.
Okay, now you mentioned earlier about Lyndon B. Johnson talking about how, no, man, we're totally winning this war. We are whipping butt. Okay. This is where we're going to really start to see the censorship. Like it's brought up earlier, but we don't really care. And now Adrian wants to talk about the bombing, and he's not allowed to. He is forced to not speak about it. Is there, I don't want to say proof, because I mean, maybe you can, maybe you can't. was there censorship in Vietnam in the early years?
Oh, yeah, very much so. There's censorship in Vietnam all the way through the end. There's censorship in every American war.
Mhm.
In Vietnam, though, it's a little more extreme, might be the right word, than it is previously, because the Americans are very much not the good guys, and it's becoming clearer and clearer and clearer that nobody's the good guy.
Right.
And that they're not winning, and that if you're winning, bars in the middle of Saigon, which is super far from the actual combat front line, by the way, do not burst into flame, and guys don't die in IED attacks on Jeeps and mine explosions in the middle of the street, and farmers don't pick up machine guns and attack military bases. So it's definitely... And the thing about the censorship in the movie is that it's being censored for the troops, in the sense that the troops get their news about what's going on from the Army radio, and so you just simply don't tell them. So it probably wouldn't have been censored back home. Everybody back home probably would have read in at least a little side note in like the New York Times that, hey, a popular GI bar in Saigon blew up this morning, and vice versa. So the My Lai massacre that happens later, which does not have anything to do with the movie, but it's a good example of Vietnam censorship. American soldiers murder 300 unarmed men, women, and children in a South Vietnamese village, and have to be warded off with their own helicopters. Like, the helicopter pilots come down and point their miniguns at the troops to save the survivors of the massacre. And it's kept under wraps for like a year and a half until finally somebody leaks it to the American press and is like, hey, just so you know, my former platoon gunned down, hundreds of people for no reason.
My gosh.
Yeah, it's brutal.
All right. Well, you said in there that nobody's the good guy, and I think that's what we're really going to see here as the movie starts to not quite wrap up yet, but as the rest of it unfolds.
Well, I think we see it in the bar fight that Cronauer starts, in the sense that here are these American GIs who the whole position is we're here to help and save the South Vietnamese people, calling them racial slurs and treating them like crap in their own bar, in a bar owned by South Vietnamese residents.
So Adrian, with his muzzle donned, is going to go back on the airwave, attempting a cheap imitation of his normally charismatic act, only to immediately begin reporting the real news. His mic is turned off, his voice silenced, and once again, the powers that be have control over the information given to the American troops. This is when he's already got a slap on the wrist, and now he's going to start getting into some real trouble here. There's a line, Hawk can replace him till we find a suitable replacement. That's hilarious. And
then it's hilariously bad what Hawk tries to do.
Our guy from Batman says, "The stuff you wrote, sir, it's not funny, it's sad." And the delivery of that line is perfect.
Then why were you laughing when you typed it up? I was thinking of something else.
Hawk keeps playing polkas, and it's mentioned like a couple dozen times. What the hell is a polka?
It's a type of music. It's a type of Eastern European, like, dancing German dance music.
Is it like techno without a computer?
It's what you hear. The song that plays when Hawk is on the radio, that's a polka.
It's elevator music.
Basically. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So meanwhile, Adrian meets the Vietnamese people, some of which have lost relatives to American soldiers. This is a broad question. What was the attitude of the Vietnamese people towards the American occupants?
In 1965, I'd say it's generally favorable. But it's not so much in the countryside. It's not. So the thing about South Vietnam is that between 1964 and 1973, when we pull out, there are 5 governments, all of them backed by the U.S. Army, all of them corrupt, all of them relatively inefficient, and none of them democratically elected. So
5 governments in South Vietnam?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
North Vietnam has 1 the entire time. To give you an idea of stability, versus stability. It's also this thing that it's guerrilla war in the South. You're fighting the Viet Cong, which are the southern Vietnamese who have joined the North Vietnamese terror militia, basically, who will hold villages hostage, who will murder civilians to get what they want, will intimidate them into letting them hoard weapons and food, And then the Americans come along, and if you're hoarding weapons and food for the Viet Cong, you're the Viet Cong, and they either kill you or throw you in jail or burn your village down.
Not ideal.
So in the cities right now, it's generally favorable in the sense that they wouldn't like have asked the Americans to come, but they don't hate them being there. But already in the countryside, it's as soon as there are boots on the ground in numbers for Americans, there's problems in the countryside in terms of how they treat people, how they're treated by the people, Viet Cong versus U.S. Army, who's crueler, that kind of stuff. Okay. So,
yeah, as you've kind of noticed, this comedy's starting to get hella depressing.
It's turned into a dark comedy real fast.
Yeah, and I forget the actress's name. Apparently, the lady who plays Trin, and I really hope I'm saying that name right. Apparently, this was her only acting role.
Really?
Yep.
I thought she did a really good job.
She did great.
You know.
Yeah. As expected, the people want Adrian back on the radio, and they want Hawk taken out of there. There's a great line. Captain Hawk sucks the sweat off a dead man's balls. It's hilarious. That is such a great insult.
Yeah, and Private Garlic says, and I don't even know what that means, sir, but I seriously doubt that it's a compliment.
So the people are going to get what they want. Adrian's reinstated despite Hawk's protests. Adrian doesn't really want to get back on the air, though. He wants to leave the disc jockey business forever. But he's going to get stuck in traffic around a bunch of soldiers, and he proves he is a rock star amongst these men. He puts smiles on faces of men walking through the pits of hell. Kyle, during my research, I stumbled across a fact that you might be able to verify, or if nothing else, at least find interesting. If this is indeed 1965, the soldiers in Vietnam would most likely still be carrying an M14 rather than an M16, which wouldn't be used widespread in the war until March of that year and did not until 1966 with this particular division. The men that are in the trucks have a big red one patch on their shoulder.
Yeah, the 1st Division. Yeah.
1st Division of the Army. And apparently they did not get their M16s until 1966.
Yeah, that sounds right because it's a new gun, and so they're saving it for frontline troops like the air cav.
It's a lot of plastic.
It is a lot of plastic. That's what I hear.
Sam Elliott.
I also hear that if I needed one, there'd be plenty laying around. So
great line, man. Great line.
Oh, yeah.
Not the best movie, but that was a great line.
There's actually a phenomenon in Vietnam where even later in the war, they're trained on M14s and then they're handed M16s when they deploy. So you're trained on a completely different firearm, and then they're like, "Okay, go to the jungle with your piece of plastic, have fun, don't die."
Now this is going to be my Call of Duty experience talking here. Is the M14 semi-automatic and the M16 would be fully automatic, correct?
At the time, they're both fully automatic. Or
I didn't even know the M14 could be a fully automatic.
Well, the problem with the M14 is it's a 7.62 caliber, like millimeter bullet. Mm-hmm. So full auto is basically a 30 round machine gun on your shoulder. And it turns out, ironically, in hindsight, the M14 might actually have been the better weapon to send people to Vietnam with because it's our equivalent of an AK-47 in terms of how rugged it is.
You can break it down and clean it.
Yeah, it's easy. It never jams. You can put it on single shot and fire as much as you can pull the trigger. You can't see anything in Vietnam anyway. Someday look up the bullet statistics of how many rounds fired by U.S. troops versus casualties gained. It's redonkulous. But the M16 is new. It's lighter. It fires faster, more accurately when it works, and so that's what they go with. And then they fix it as the war goes on, and now it's one of the most reliable weapons that the U.S. Army has.
So these men are going to pass by, heading towards the unknown. Adrian remembers why he does what he does. The audience. That's what it's about. They lift him up above themselves, and for that, he owes them a show. Louis B. Armstrong's going to sing a song that wasn't released until 1967. Other fun fact here. As tragedies befalling the Vietnam people caught in the crossfire of war are going to play out, there's visuals of protesters and police clashing. What's this about? This may kind of second with the attitude of American people question.
So it's usually at this point, it's not protests against Americans yet. It's protests against the South Vietnamese government.
Governments?
Governments, yes. Which is why you will notice that it is Vietnamese police breaking up Vietnamese protesters.
Right, that's what I thought was interesting. So I was wondering what this was all about.
Yeah, so at the time, so in 1962 or 1963, President Diem is assassinated by his own generals in South Vietnam.
Not good.
Diem is corrupt and cruel, and he is a Catholic ruling a nation almost completely made up of Buddhists. But he is a crusading Inquisition level Catholic. His policies lead to Buddhist monks lighting themselves on fire in the street in protest.
Is that what that was about? I always thought that was in protest of the war.
No, it's in protest of President Diem himself.
Oh.
And his anti-Buddhist stances and policies.
He's
assassinated by his own generals. I forget who takes over after him, but it's just it all ends up being the same. Corrupt general stages a coup, oppresses the people in the hopes of winning the war, and as the war becomes more and more Americanized for a couple years, extorting money from the war, and then cycle repeats.
Shame on you, dude.
There's a reason the South Vietnam lasts less than 2 years after American troops leave, even though they outnumber and outgun the North Vietnamese army by the time we leave.
Did the war continue after the American troops left?
For 2 years. But the thing about, so the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, or ARVN, which is a mean joke by Robin Williams' character, Adrian Cronauer, but when he's comparing them to the Wizard of Oz, he says the Munchkins are the ARVN army because Asian people are generally short. Anyway.
It's not funny.
No, his words, not mine. So the ARVN army is large and capable, but its willingness to fight and its leadership depends wildly unit to unit to unit. It is armed completely by the U.S. We leave and they have something like 2,000 tanks available, hundreds of planes, artillery pieces, rockets. If you read the Spring Offensive of 1975, which is the one where the North Vietnamese conquer South Vietnam, finally take Saigon, all that jazz, they are outnumbered by the ARVN army, by the South Vietnamese army. They're outgunned. In theory, they should never have won, but their leadership is so much better. Their sense of national unity is better. They haven't had a decade of civil unrest and corrupt governments. They have had one government, one leadership, one purpose, and they smash into the fragmented ARVN army like a hammer blow, and they take Saigon within 3 months, 2 months, something like that.
All right. Major Dickerson's going to send Adrian down a dangerous path. Anlock? Is that right? Is that a real place? Or I think that's what they said, Anlock.
It could be. It could not be. He goes to a remote village. You know?
Okay. It's nothing like prominent.
It's not historically significant, no.
Gotcha, okay. Okay. Sending him to a known dangerous area that has fallen into Viet Cong hands. Sorry, one more thing real quick. Reminder, difference between Viet Cong and Vietnam Army. Viet Cong is like terrorists?
Yeah, so the Viet Cong are South Vietnamese defectors, quote unquote, to the North Vietnamese cause. So they are people from South Vietnam who live in South Vietnam who are a militia who fight on behalf of North Vietnam. They're a communist militia of locals. And they usually engage in terror tactics because they know the land, they know the people, and they can blend in seamlessly, even more seamlessly than the North Vietnamese can.
They're essentially traitors. Yes,
the North Vietnamese army is the professional, trained, equipped by the Soviet Union and China military wing of the People's Republic or whatever it is of North Vietnam.
Okay. I knew you had mentioned that in a previous episode, but I could not remember the details of it.
So, NVA, tanks, planes, AK-47s, uniforms. Viet Cong, bombs, punji sticks, spike traps, napalm.
Got you.
Is a good way to keep them separate in your brain.
Okay. Adrian and Garlic are going to crash their Jeep. They hide in the jungle, attempting to escape the surveillance party that's after them. The news of their disappearance is, of course, not important enough or approved to be broadcasted. Luckily, Tuan finds them, but unluckily, his car won't start. Luckily, a helicopter arrives whose engine does work, and our heroes are back home. Nope, unluckily, they're back at their base.
Yeah.
So, a lot of, hey, we're still alive. This still sucks.
Safe to say a lot of ups and downs, you know?
Yeah. Up in the helicopter, down
in the, yeah.
All right. I must say the jungles of Vietnam do look beautiful.
They do, except they're the jungles of Thailand, so.
Right. They're the jungles of Thailand, which do look beautiful.
Which presumably are probably very similar to the jungles of Vietnam, but I wouldn't know. I haven't been to either place.
I haven't either. We should go sometime.
Yeah, but maybe to Thailand, not Vietnam.
Fair enough. I don't know what do Americans not go to Thailand? Sorry. Do Americans not go to Vietnam?
Oh, they
Very
totally
commonly?
do. It's just, it's fine. It's like Americans going to China. You can go and you'll probably have a good time, but you got to be careful about what you say and who you say it to.
Okay. It's just a little bit, still a little animosity there.
Little bit, not the biggest fan. So if you go to Vietnam as a tourist who happens to be American, from what I understand, you're completely fine. The people are very friendly. It's no big deal. If you go to Vietnam as an American tourist, you may not get a super duper warm welcome.
Okay.
Because American tourists tend to think the rest of the world is or should be like America. And, it's very much not. So,
Where are the subtitles?
where is the fried chicken? Why can I not complain about the government on my Twitter feed?
That's fair. Tuan is suspected of being a Viet Cong terrorist. Sergeant Major Dickerson kicks Adrian out of the service with an honorable discharge. Adrian replies, the best line in the movie, "You are in more dire need of a blowjob than any white man in history."
Get wrecked.
In return, Dickerson is going to be transferred to Guam. Regardless, who's the one? I forgot his name. The one above Dickerson.
Oh,
the one that actually likes Adrian.
It's the general. I can't remember his name.
I can't
but
remember
it's the
his name
actual
either.
general of the freaking division. So he so far outranks Dickerson. It's not even funny. And the fact that in the movie Dickerson is able to argue with him is just movie plot. If a sergeant
Gotcha.
major is told by a general to shut the hell up, he shuts the hell up.
It's funny because the general, as after he tells Dickerson he's going to Guam, turns around and is snickering about Adrian's line to him.
Yep.
Adrian, instead of leaving quietly, tries to find Tuan and save him, knowing that he's going to be essentially hunted down by the American troops. During the scene, we see a very poor side of Vietnam. Is this widespread, or is this just the whole country in turmoil? Is this kind of like just he's wandering through the ghetto? What's going on here?
It's a little of all three, honestly. I mean, Saigon's a city. There's going to be rundown parts of a city like any other city. Vietnam is back then, especially, a place of staggering wealth inequality and poverty.
Okay.
Really, when you get out to the villages, for sure, they live life the same way they have for 1,000 years. And then the cities are cities, but they're colonized, and they were built extensively by the French, the U.S. They're not cities as we know them. They're like colonial power hubs that are built like cities. But the only businesses are going to be things that, for the most part, directly benefit the greater power that is there.
Okay.
So the living standards are not going to be as high as a European city, for sure.
Gotcha.
Or an American city.
Let's wrap up this movie, man.
Yes.
Tuan admits to being one of the ones behind the bombing of the restaurant, adding complexity to the relationship between him and Adrian.
Mm-hmm.
He leaves the movie as an unresolved antagonist, much like the Vietnam War as a whole.
Yeah. And you don't really know how you feel about him, because on the one hand, you want to dislike him because he got 2 guys killed. On the other hand, he makes really good points where he's like, why should I care? Half my village has been killed by you guys on purpose or not,
Yeah. He says, he has a line about, "You call me enemy, yet you are the one who came here, killed my father, killed my mother, killed my neighbor," all these things. There's no resolution with Tren either. She turns him down. She's not going with him.
Mm-hmm.
There's no happy romance at the end of it. He doesn't get the girl. Again, symbolizing that unfinished and unresolved conflict of war.
It's a good metaphor for there is no solace for Americans in Vietnam. There's nothing redemptive about that experience.
Right.
It's all defeat. It's you lost the citizens, you gave up on the war. The area that you defended for so long gave up on itself and was conquered. It's just there's nothing there. There's nothing good that came out of it. And same thing with the movie. There's nothing lasting that comes out of his experience in Vietnam. He was just a flash in the pan of happiness in this god-awful war that goes on for another 8 years after he leaves.
Which kind of mirrors Robin Williams' legacy. It's been a decade since he passed.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of mirrors that of he was who he was. He was an original. He was someone who put smiles on faces, and then lasting impact. I mean, he's gone, and that's kind of all that is.
Yeah, and it's sad. It's also just one of those all eras come to an end sort of thing. So for when you're a historian or when you just know the course of the Vietnam War, the worst part is that 1965 is the best it's going to get for anybody involved. It's literally just downhill from there. I guess unless you're the North Vietnamese, and then that's a flip statement. But yeah,
North Vietnamese. I don't know if we have any North Vietnamese listeners, but I hope that we didn't make you angry with that.
Well, now they're just Vietnamese listeners. It's all the same place now. So
That's true.
they unified it. It's just Vietnam, and they, from what I understand, it's been a long time since anybody from North or South has gotten into it with each other.
That's fair.
Unlike our Civil War, we just can't seem to get past that.
Fun fact: one of the radio broadcasters that would take over for the real life Adrian Cronauer was Pat Sajak, who just recently retired from the Wheel of Fortune.
Wheel of Fortune.
Would this movie have been better if it had been more similar to Doctor Strangelove, an over-the-top dark comedy, or do you think it captured? Because I almost feel like this is not a rewatchable movie like Doctor Strangelove because the tone shifts so hard partway through. You get that the first act is that 80s feel good. Here we go. Just, one guy's just untouchable around a bunch of silly little things. And then it just completely shifts. And I don't feel like the drama in it is good, but it's not Platoon or Full Metal Jacket level.
Sure. I don't know. I don't think it would be any better if it went as crazy as Doctor Strangelove, because I think the only way Doctor Strangelove works is because it makes fun of the Cold War as a whole and a very specific era of the Cold War that is, because nuclear war never happened, is just absolutely ridiculous. It's just a ridiculous period of history. I think the Vietnam War, the negative consequences are too real. Like it's too corporeal to just make a complete black comedy about it. It's the reason we can make the movie Death of Stalin, if you haven't seen that, which is a hilarious, super dark comedy about Khrushchev coming to power after Stalin dies in the early 50s in Soviet Union, is because the West didn't experience any consequences of that. We can't make a dark comedy about the killing of Abraham Lincoln. Right. Like you just can't. So I think there's something too lasting about the awfulness of Vietnam to be able to just go full dark comedy and not offend people more than you make them laugh.
That makes sense. That's something I hadn't thought about. Like if the Cold War had turned into,
if Khrushchev had pushed the nuclear button, we wouldn't make joking movies about him taking over. But Stalin was the worst person of the two of them, and so in the West we can make a movie making fun of how ridiculous the power changes felt when they were happening.
In a way, the Cold War led to Vietnam, did it not?
Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, Vietnam is the Cold War. It's a proxy war of the Cold War. It's
right.
In this regard, it's more of the U.S. trying to take a aggressive view of inserting their opinion on the world in places that aren't Europe and Australia, and it doesn't work. Because nobody wants them there, because the French are the bad guys in the French Indochina War. They're the colonizers. They're the ones oppressing the Vietnamese. They're the ones throwing people into jail for wanting independence. And then you come back and you just step into their shoes. And in the eyes of the Vietnamese people, you try to do the exact same thing that the French had been doing.
Yeah.
So
I feel like I'm the only person who didn't know the French were there before the Americans, because when we did We Were Soldiers, they're talking about the French first, and then in this movie they're like, first the French, now you Americans. And I was like, was I the only one who didn't know the French?
I think a lot of people don't know the French are there first, so I wouldn't worry about it.
All right, man. It's bit as dope it, bit as nope it.
Oh man, okay.
You ready?
Yeah.
You want to go first? You want me to go first?
Sure, I'll go first.
All right. 3, 2, 1. You're on.
Okay, my biggest dope is just the effortless comedy pulled off by all of the people with speaking roles in this movie. They're all so good. Even actors that you don't normally view as comedic, like Forrest Whitaker or whatever. Private Garlic.
Yep.
Yeah. So good. Biggest nope. I don't have a lot of nopes. I think making the bar owner like clearly effeminate is a very 80s trope that doesn't strike the same chord now as it did then. Might be my biggest.
I didn't feel like it was rudely done though.
No, it wasn't rude. It doesn't hit like it would have back then. I don't think. You're just
As
like
a joke, I agree.
yeah.
Okay, 20 seconds. Here we go. Biggest dope. I'm gonna go with when the specific scene of when the bar blows up, because that's such a powerful shift in tone that I think is really good filmmaking. Biggest nope. I'm gonna go with the speech. Oh shoot, I'm out of time. Oh no. I'm out of time. What I was gonna say was the scenes where he's teaching English. I don't think it's very funny. I think you could have done it one time of like a Vietnamese person accidentally saying something incorrectly, and it could have been funny, but they did it like 20 times in a row.
Like so many times, yeah.
And it just didn't add to it. You know, I felt like that was kind of a waste. We could have had something more instead. I think those scenes were kind of a drag. Kind of
forced, maybe. Yeah.
A little bit forced. Yeah. All right, what would you give it for a rating, buddy?
Ooh, historically, I think I can be pretty generous. I'll give it an 8, even though Adrian Cronauer gives it a 40%. I think when you watch it, the vibe of Vietnam that you get from it, especially when you turn serious, really good. Even if it's not fact for fact accurate, really good. So I'll give it a 7 or an 8 historically. Personal enjoyment, I'll give it a 8. I like the tonal shift. I think it's hard to rewatch, but I like it. And I think that it's a good testament to comedy will only get you so far in a war. And suddenly there's nothing but the war. And once you're in it, you're never, ever, ever going to be able to escape it, personally or in the greater world.
Right. I wonder, apparently there was a planned sequel called Good Morning Chicago that would follow him back home.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that could have been a great comedy kind of show. You could have a little subplot about how he's still feeling the effects and maybe address PTSD a little bit. But
or it would have gone the Grown Ups 2 route, and instead of having a plot, it would have just been Robin Williams going balls to the wall for an hour and a half.
I don't remember a thing about Grown Ups 2.
All I remember is Grown Ups has something that resembles a plot and like an arc and a resolution and character development, and Grown Ups 2 is like, let's just get these 4 comedians in here and be morons, and we'll see what happens.
Grown Ups 2 has Shaq in it, right?
Yes, it did.
Okay,
and he might be the best part of that movie.
Shaq's the best part of anything he's in.
God, so true.
All right.
Hey, you didn't rate the movie.
I didn't rate the movie. Oh, yeah, I didn't rate the movie.
Don't weasel out of it. Give the movie your rating.
My rating for this movie is going to
7.
be a 7. I was thinking a 7.
Oh, wow. Shocker.
I know, shocker. I was thinking a 7. I want to give it a 6.5 because, I don't know, I was kind of, when I watched it, I went in expecting more comedy. And when the tone shift happened and I was like, oh, this isn't really a comedy, I don't know. Maybe if you would have addressed the first act of like, there's more to his character, if you would have made him more likable and not just a comedian for the first 30 minutes, everything he does is a joke. There's nothing serious. And even though he does it phenomenally, it just doesn't give me as much to grab onto later in the movie.
Yeah, I get that.
And so I feel like it has a little bit of an identity crisis. It's definitely pushed the boundaries, and I appreciate that. And it tried to do something different. I read the thing that like there was a lot of pushback of like Vietnam is not a backdrop for a comedy. It's like, okay, let's just make the same movie 30,000 times about Vietnam, and give it Academy Awards and act like that's all we ever have to do.
We'll just have Oliver Stone make 57 movies about Vietnam. There's nothing wrong with that,
Nothing wrong with that. Let's just keep going. It's not exploitation, okay? It's a comedy. At least makes people laugh about it. Okay, moving on.
Keep a long rant short,
Alrighty. Kyle, what are we talking about next week?
We are talking about Oh man, what are we talking about next
Gosh
week?
dang it, Kyle, you started so confident. I was like, oh, he has an idea.
I was so ready and I was like, oh crap, I don't know
Kyle
what it is.
has an idea. This is a first. This is episode, I think this will be episode 16. This will be episode 16. And I was like, it took 16 episodes, but Kyle finally knows. I guess during Oppenheimer Part 1 and 2, that was the only time that we knew what we were doing next. No, we didn't. We did it because I didn't know
what was going to be next.
I didn't know if I was going to release it the following week or if I was going to wait and release it later. We didn't even know then. We literally did a Part 1, Part 2, and we were like, is there a Part 1.5?
We never know.
I don't know.
We never know.
Oh my gosh, man. What are we doing?
I don't know. It's amateur hour over here.
Flying by the seat of our pants.
Oh, we just did a comedy. I don't know. You know what? Let's keep it up. Let's do 2 comedies in a row. We do a lot of really sad movies all back to back to back.
This one was kind of sad too. It wasn't even a comedy.
Let's do a real comedy.
Let's do an actual comedy.
Let's do an actual, never serious comedy.
So, what are we talking about next week, Kyle?
So next week is Keanu Reeves and this guy whose name nobody knows.
No, he was a semi-famous name for a while.
And this guy whose name nobody remembers. How about that? Remembers.
I feel bad, other guy.
Get in a telephone booth, and let me tell you, their journey is so great.
Some would say
it'd
be excellent.
Maybe, just maybe.
All right. Next week, we're going to talk about another comedy, a real comedy this time, not some make you sad halfway through comedy. All right?
How dare that movie have a plot, Dustin? I apologize. Next time, we'll watch a Jeff Dunham skit.
I want to watch 2 stoners learn how to pass a high school history exam.
You watched that with your own eyes. How'd it go?
I don't know. I haven't watched it yet.
I can't remember.
Oh, okay. I didn't get the insult.
There it is.
Nah, I passed, I think. I'm pretty sure. I graduated. I had to have passed. Tune in next Tuesday, 7 a.m. Be there, sharp. Just kidding. Listen to it anytime. Go back and listen to season 1. Please go back and listen to how bad we were when we first started. We weren't great. We were okay. But looking back, we're better, I think, now. So that's a good thing.
I'd agree.
I
think we're more confident now. I think we know what we're doing, which is good.
No, I think that second part is exactly it. We know what we're doing. We had no idea what we were doing when we first started.
No.
Just 2 microphones in a room having a conversation.
2 microphones and a pregnant woman.
What else is a podcast?
Well, usually I don't think there's a pregnant woman as part of it.
I guess the pregnant woman is an addition that we did not.
That was our gimmick.
Have to have.
That was our gimmick. But she refused to have her baby during the podcast. So
ridiculous. Do it for the clout.
Do it for the views.
All right.
God, Ewan.
13 minutes of this is just our outro.
Try to maybe make that 3. Here we go.
And goodbye.
And goodbye. Music plays.